Well, hello and welcome to our thought for the day. I'd like to talk a bit about Paul the Apostle. Now, I guess if you ask most people what they know about Paul, the first two things they'd say, well, one would be he's the man whose life was turned around completely, in fact transformed, when he met Jesus on the road to Damascus. And the second thing most people would probably say is that he was the person who was given the message that the good news of Jesus was for absolutely everyone. But we know quite a lot more about Paul from the New Testament. He recorded several facts about himself. One was that he had considerable social standing. He'd been born as a Roman citizen, and that gave him enormous security across that vast empire. You might remember how worried the town magistrates of Philippi were, recorded in Acts 16, when they discovered that they had beaten and imprisoned someone of his status. They had to get out of their beds quite early one morning to go and placate him before he'd leave prison. Well, that's not something you'd find happening very often in Britain of the 21st century, I rather suspect. The second thing is that he had considerable religious standing. In his letter to the Philippians in chapter 3, he describes himself as a Hebrew of Hebrews. No one could be more Hebrew. A Pharisee. And as far as legalistic righteousness was concerned, he was faultless. It's almost as saying, as much as anyone could stand before God on their own account, Paul could. Yet his next words in the letter are, "Whatever was to my profit, I consider loss for the sake of Jesus and knowing him." He puts it even more forcefully. He says that he treats these privileges he has as rubbish to be thrown away, so that he can gain Christ and be made right with God through his faith in Jesus, and not through keeping the law. In other words, he deliberately refuses to rely on the kind of human advantages he has, which the world of his day, and indeed the world of today, place so much value on. I wonder if we're willing to do the same. And how far do we share Paul's single-minded focus on knowing Jesus? Or do we, however subtly, also try to rely on any standing we have in our community, or the church positions we might hold, in terms of our dealings with God? It's certainly a good challenge for me, and for each of us, as we live through these uncertain times, when it's all too easy to grasp for any security that seems immediately to hand. In this letter, Paul goes on to remind his readers that if we're Christians, we're citizens of heaven, and we should live accordingly. In a very personal passage, he talks about forgetting what is in the past and pressing on towards the goal that is life with God in heaven. Now, while we are experiencing restrictions on our lives, let's remember that Paul was writing his letter to the Philippian church while under arrest and in chains. So may the Holy Spirit help us to live as joyfully and as purposefully as Paul did, as we're citizens of God's kingdom. And let's do so openly, in front of others, remembering that it's not an exclusive kingdom, but one that is open to all who trust in Jesus